All right, thank you, Jenny. We're going to do this a little bit different today. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. We just had a town hall in our kind of our quarterly update meeting just 6 weeks ago. I'm only going to touch on a few things that are in the slides, and then leave the rest of this open for Q&A for the next hour. So first of all, I want to thank everybody for those of you who are still working on campus, keeping things going, landscape services, custodial facilities, those of you on IT keeping the network going, and everyone from continuing to work from home. When we met last time, we were in the middle of solving our budget problem for next year. As you may recall, we had budgets submitted in March, but because of the pandemic, that hastened some of the actions that we needed to take to balance the budget. If we look at the first slide on the PowerPoint, you can see that it goes back to where we were expecting to have a year-end budget deficit of around operating deficit of around $11 million. We had a $6 million structural deficit to start the year. We had shared that with the board. The board knew that they were going to give us several years to solve the budget deficit, so we did not need to make significant cuts this year. However, during the year, we had the additional 1% rescission from the governor in the fall. We had a revenue miss from enrollments and tuition fees of $3 million, and then the governor had an additional $1 million rescission. So that we really are starting the year with, if we do nothing different next year, with an $11.7 million deficit. That's not financially sustainable, and so we needed to look at solving that structural problem. In addition, the governor ordered a 5% one-time reduction in general fund appropriation to us. So that really meant that we have a $16 million problem going into next year. Yes, so hey. I'm unmuted.
Sorry about that.
So at what point did I drop off? Did any of my...
you dropped off, Glenn, this is Cody, you dropped off at summing the first slide at 16 million.
16 million, yep.
Okay, so we had a $16 million deficit we needed to solve for next year, 11.7 in terms of a structural problem, which we were going to take several years to resolve, but we started the year with that number only being 6, and then a $5 million one time. So thanks to everyone across campus, every unit across campus participated in reductions for next year. It was a painful process. Yes, we'll be down about 100 positions for next year. About half of those are open positions, and another half were positions that were eliminated. So going into next year, we've solved our structural deficit, but then we still have the $5 million deficit from the rescission the governor created. And $2 million of that will be resolved by the furlough plan, and another $3 million of that will be resolved by essentially centrally sweeping salary savings for FY21. That's not a process that we want to go through in the future. We don't want to turn that into a expected process, but for FY21, we felt that that would be the best way that we could solve this one-time budget cost problem. Now, I think it is cause for celebration that we've solved the structural deficit issue. However, there's some caution to the wind. That assumes we have no reduction in enrollments. As you know, with the COVID-19 pandemic, there's a lot of students are taking their time this summer to decide if it's safe to go back to school, no matter where they go to school. So we don't know what the enrollment picture will look like. If the enrollments are significantly down, we'll have to go back to the table with other budget cutting ideas. In terms of roaring back, plans. Managers are organizing their rebound plans right now. So we are continuing to use telework as appropriate. We're now in stage 3. Stage 3 began May 30th and ends June 12th, and we have a potential to move to stage 4 next week, starting June 13th. In the slides, we have a link to the PDF of the rebound plan, and then also to what some of the operation plan guidelines are. I believe Katie Thomas is with us today. Katie will be able to respond to some of the direct questions around the roaring back plan as well, and Trevor if need be. So at this point in time, rather than me talking for the next 15 minutes and showing you another 7 slides and us celebrating our successes over the last 6 weeks, I'd really like to turn it all over to you and field any questions that you have. So with that, Ginny, I'll throw the mic back to you as the moderator.
Okay, thanks, Glenn. Okay, so anybody can ask questions via chat feature to me or to the public, or in public chat. So we don't have any lined up. Glenn, if you want to give us any other information from admin council or updates that you have, and we'll wait for some questions.
Well, I just want to give everyone my sincere thanks for everything you've been doing in this challenging environment. Trying to make sure we did everything we could for students as they closed out the semester, and for working diligently to prepare for fall, even as we don't know what fall is going to look like. Certainly, we want students on campus to be safe. I know Cheryl and her team, those of you helping her with space planning, have been looking at all the classroom spaces and trying to figure out how we could do them with safe social distancing. That's pretty much what I had prepared to share today, Jenny. I just really wanted to make myself available to answer questions to the team from this.
Perfect. Thanks, Glenn. And I'm sure there will be more questions coming. The first one is, can we expect further flexibility to work from home if it is possible for our job?
I certainly believe that at this time we learned how we could effectively work from home. The normal environment would be that we're working from our offices. HR is working on additional guidance for telework. As you all know, in today's pre-COVID environment, we had telework plans in place. There are procedures to follow. Forms need to be filled out, etc., to get approval for that. So certainly, as we roar back, telework will still be encouraged until we are safely at a position that we're past the pandemic. Once we're beyond that, it will be more of a local supervisory decision if we were not dealing with the pandemic.
Thank you. And Katie, not to put you on the spot, someone is suggesting if you have anything else to add to Glenn's statements about our rebound plan for employees.
Nothing specifically, I think, related to remote work. Yes, that's correct. We want to continue to utilize remote work wherever possible. We will be moving forward with processes to work on actually more formalized telework agreements. When we left in the spring, everything happened very quickly. So those who will be doing ongoing telework will be going through the process more that we've had built in the past related to looking at those duties and what makes sense from the team standpoint, the supervisory standpoint. And then just to piggyback on that a little bit, employees in vulnerable populations or caretakers for vulnerable populations, definitely want to talk with supervisors one-on-one and identify plans for what's the most appropriate plan to ensure safety for vulnerable populations of employees, and working through the details of that with HR as well.
Great, thank you, Katie. And I know our admin council and the employees committee is working hard to make sure that everything is put together and safely safe as we maneuver back, and things are always subject to change depending on the local information. Okay, Glenn, will you post the slide deck on the webpage? I think people are interested in your information. Will that be posted anywhere, Trevor and Glenn? And Trevor is confirming that yes, it can be posted, no problem. Okay. Are we following the governor's stages? What if we have a larger outbreak here locally?
Yes, we are following the governor's stages for the state of Idaho. If we have a larger outbreak locally, I believe that does impact where we are for stage 3 and 4. Katie, could you correct me if I'm wrong on that or confirm that?
Yeah, we are. So we are following the governor's stages. That's correct. And I think we have a public health team within our groups of committees as we're working on these rebound guidelines. And what we have to be prepared to do is sort of adjust nimbly if there are regional outbreaks. So we can anticipate that at some point there may be some regional difference in operation between our, Ada County operations versus Southeast Idaho operations. So there's nothing planned at this point with major regional differences, but that's definitely something we have to be ready to do and to deal with if outbreaks occur more regionally, and we'll be prepared to do so.
Glenn, can you talk about what employees should do if they encounter resistance to others wearing face coverings?
Jenny, could you repeat the question?
Sure. So the question is, what should we do if we encounter resistance to people wearing face coverings?
We will be publishing guidance on face coverings and how to handle each of the situations as we move forward. Katie, do you know when that guidance will be published?
Yeah, sure. I can talk a little bit more about that. So currently there is, as you see at the slide on your screen, there is guidance developed, or guidelines that we developed and released for stages 2 and 3. So we're currently within stage 3, and stage 4 is anticipated to begin June 13th, assuming there's no spike in cases, and we're following the guidelines to be able to do so. So we are working currently on guidelines for stage 4, a lot of which will mirror some of the guidelines in stages 2 and 3. So expecting continuation of cloth face coverings in indoor spaces. If you're in a private office, you don't necessarily need to wear it if you're in your office. Once you're in your office, but when you're up and about and moving past people in areas where physical distancing is harder to maintain. So we do have additional guidance on face coverings that's coming, and that stage 4 guidance we're hoping to be finalized by the end of the week, but we're still working through some guidelines and questions within that as well.
Great. Thanks, Glenn and Katie. Next question, about returning or teleworking, is it incumbent for the worker to reach out to the supervisor or vice versa?
The supervisor should be reaching out to their team for returning to work to ensure that their team members know what the plan is and how to move forward. Certainly, though, you're down to your supervisor if it's unclear.
Okay, next question. I'm interested in the sort of things being done to protect our students in the classrooms, in their classrooms. What will that look like?
Do you want to handle?
Yeah, sure. I can speak to that. So right now we have 4 committees that are working sort of behind the scenes at the university on all of these guidelines. One that I'm involved with more closely is the Employee Operations Committee, but we also have one specifically for instruction and another one specifically for student services, and then a 4th one for community, the public, essentially, in addition to our public health team. So we're all working together. So I have a little bit of insight into some of the things that are being done. One of the things that I know regarding the instruction committee, and Cheryl, jump in if you want to share anything here. I know that facilities is working really hard going through each and every space on campus and estimating or measuring essentially what our new updated occupancy ratings numbers for the various classrooms we have on campus with a physical distancing of 6 feet in each room. So what they're doing is going through the process of evaluating every space so we know exactly how many spaces or how many individuals each classroom can hold. That will have an impact on scheduling and rescheduling of classes. I know that they're also looking at, from the instruction standpoint, a variety of models for instruction. So there will be some classes held in person. A lot of them will utilize what they're calling the high flex option, which may have certain groups of students in person, let's say Monday, Wednesday, other students in person different days, certain students who may opt for fully online. And it would be a hybrid model where the instructor is essentially teaching in person and online, whether that be on demand or live online at the same time. So giving students a variety of options and ways, and that's intended to help minimize those numbers in a classroom at a given time, because we'll have space limitations with physical distancing. Regarding the student committee, so they're in discussions right now regarding student face coverings. And I believe there's discussion going on at the admin council level related to what the languaging will be and how to provide face coverings for students and encourage the use of face coverings for students. We're also looking at a variety of options for faculty, because we want to make sure their safety is ensured as well. So different kinds of things that we'll be doing in the classroom related to their protection, and then figuring out cleaning and disinfection protocols as classes switch and things like that. So there's a lot of work still to be done. It's a little bit of we're building the plane and flying it at the same time. So as new data is emerging almost daily from the research community related to the virus and related to protective measures, and universities all across the country are going through the same thing at the same time. So it changes very, very quickly, but there are a lot of things in the works and in discussions moving toward putting forth those types of guidelines for protection of faculty, staff, and students.
Next question, will there be a policy or plan put in place for procuring PPE and cleaning supplies?
You want me to take that, Glenn? I can talk about it a little bit. So yes. That's one of the other things that is in the works. So yes, there will be, I don't know if we'll necessarily put a policy in place, but we are working on procedures for departments to be able to procure supplies and figure out what that means and how it will be done. In the short term, a lot of supplies are available through Bengal Depot, and I think we're planning on using that. And Cheryl, jump in if you have some additional guidance, but we're using Bengal Depot as essentially a central resource point or distribution point that we can use across all of our campuses. So even in the other campus locations, the non-Pocatello locations, getting a hold of facilities and being able to order supplies through there. I know our purchasing team is also integrated with the state. There's a new state purchasing option for certain supplies, sanitizers, masks, gloves, other types of things. And they're coordinating with facilities to procure some of those resources as well. Regarding cloth face coverings, if I can talk about that just for a second, we've had a lot of questions about that, and regarding employees, how do they get them, where do they get them, when can they get them, things like that. So where we are right now, we do have the decision approved that we will be providing every employee with 2 cloth face coverings eventually. So we're working on identifying those, ordering those. We're getting a lot of samples at this point because we want to ensure what we order when we do place a bulk order is going to fit most people, rather than sort of jumping in and ordering and then not knowing what we have. So we're putting some time and effort into choosing the right options. So we're working on procuring a bulk order of cloth face coverings. So we'll be able to provide 2 per employee eventually, probably moving into the fall rather than right now. So what we're doing right now, if you are an employee working on campus, and if you have a personal cloth face covering that you can use, we're asking that you do so in the short term while we're kind of trying to manage a very small inventory that we have currently. That said, if you are working on campus now or in the next few weeks and you don't have access to a personal cloth face covering, you can reach out to Bengal Depot and we'll make sure you get set up with one of those in the short term until we are able to get that bulk order in. And then once we do have the bulk order, we'll be distributing them campus-wide to all employees through a more central distribution process. So we'll reach out at that point and make sure we have correct numbers and are able to get the correct numbers of masks to each entity, each department.
Okay, is there a way that...
This is Nancy. Can I just add a quick thing on PPE and COVID safety supplies? Okay, anyway, I was just going to say that EHS is working closely with Katie and with purchasing in setting up those guidelines, and you should see an email out that kind of talks about if you need COVID safety supplies like disinfection and wipes, to buy them through a regular vendor that you already have, and then utilizing Bengal Depot, and then this program with the state is a sourcing program. Those supplies, the availability goes up and down, and then that state contract program that purchasing is coordinating is another way to get those safety supplies in, the gloves and the sanitizing supplies primarily.
I'd like to just jump in and say that the supplies that we're providing from the depot are those that are what they coincide with what's listed on the CDC guidelines. And there's some chemicals that we use to clean after hours that not everybody can use. We have to be suited up and with a respirator and special equipment to be able to use those. But as Nancy stated, if you have a source for supplies, that's good, but it is good to also align those with the CDC guidelines of what is going to work to kill the germs.
Hello, everyone. This is Glenn. I'm back. I apologize for the technical difficulties, but it sounds like Cheryl was handling the questions.
That's right. Cheryl and Katie and Nancy have it under control.
Thank you.
Another question related to this subject. Is there a way that social distancing can be accomplished with multiple workers within a single office environment?
Cheryl, would you like to continue talking, or Katie?
Okay, I'll jump in, although most of the guidance was provided by Katie. And I just jumped in at the last minute when you heard me, Glenn. But there are multiple
Okay, well,
so I can just go over some of them as we talked. Like we can put in arrows on the floor that show a one-way corridor, so people are going around the office in the same direction and they're not encountering each other face to face. We can try to social distance people in the same office. We can add panels, plexiglass panels, for example, but if they're closer than 6 feet, they are recommended to wear a mask. We can put up occupancies. For example, in our lobby, we can only have 2 people waiting at once because there's only enough room for 2 people to stand 6 feet away from the people that work at the front counter. All these kind of things are in part of the Roaring Back guidelines that you could put in your document that you're using to be able to come back in the office safely.
Yeah, and I'll just piggyback on that one a little bit. I know a lot of other groups are also utilizing staff rotations. So where you may have, if everybody's back all at once, physical distancing is not possible, but when it is possible to utilize a staff rotation system where you may have team A, team B, and you rotate staffing in so you can ensure distance between people at any time. That's something that a lot of groups are using as well.
Great. Thank you both. Next question. Departments are starting to ask if and when we will receive federal emergency funds and how those funds will be distributed if received.
That's a great question. We have applied for and accepted, have been accepted for the CARES Act funding. There's about $3.5 million. There are very stringent guidelines about what is reimbursed and what isn't. And the President's Office has been working with the State Board of Education on an additional source of relief funds. There was a tranche of money that was allocated to each of the states that the governor's office controls. However, that money is for K-12 as well as higher ed, as the government best sees fit. And I believe the governor's chief of staff, Alex Adams, is heading up a committee made up of a number of individuals that represent interests of both K-12 and higher ed in determining how to best spend those funds. On top of that, there was also a FEMA grant and some other potential funds that are available. So that is what the funding stream is. We're in line for some of those. We're at various stages, as I said, with the CARES Act money. We've been allocated the $3.5 million on top of the $3.5 million that went for financial aid for students. We will be waiting until later this summer to specifically ask for a reimbursement of those funds, because we need to coordinate our requests with each type of fund. We don't want to take a chance of getting reimbursed for a category that cannot be reimbursed on another fund. I didn't explain that well. Let me back up. We don't want to be in a situation where we have requested funding that is only allowed under one of the funds. If we request it under a different fund, we wouldn't be able to put other types of dollars underneath the second fund. So I still probably didn't do a really good job of that. If you have questions, I can ask or respond further. Yes, we're looking at getting the federal reimbursements.
Okay. Thanks, Glenn. And this is a bit of a long question, and just bear with me while I read it here. Many of us are finding that even if getting started was a bit awkward, working from home has turned out to be a good experience and allowed for very effective execution of work duties. In the past, work from home has been viewed fairly negative at ISU. I'd like to know, what is the ISU view of this now proven ability to work from home, given that many costs are being cut and the ability to work from home has been normal in the rest of the world for decades, depending on specific job duties. I realize this is somewhat redundant given what has been asked, but part of the answer hasn't been addressed is the use of work from home to provide employee quality of life benefits, such as the ability to work from home while waiting for a repair person, commuting on inclement weather days, or with an ill child, or even something like a sprained ankle or other minor injury that makes walking difficult.
Is Brian Sagendorf on the town hall?
I am. Good afternoon, everybody.
Brian, would you like to respond to that? Because I know you've been talking with DFM and DHR about a number of things. I think work at home may be one of those as well. And you also have the historical perspective at ISU that I don't have.
Yeah, I think thank you, everyone, and it's a great question. And I know I've been talking to a lot of our peer institutions and just kind of reading up on other state agencies and other businesses across the country. And the core of this question is that I think businesses all across the country are recognizing that they've learned some real positive things from telecommuting, and that undoubtedly coming out of this pandemic, there will be more telecommuting than what we have experienced in the past. That's not to say that it'll be uniform and a perfect solution for every single job, but without a doubt, we will be having more telecommuting than we've had in the past. It's just been an opportunity for employees and departments to identify some great solutions for positions all across campus. So the stage 4 guidance is going to continue to allow for that flexibility. We're going to be updating some documentation and processing for documenting the long-term telecommuting arrangements that will be put in place. But very short response to the question of yes, there will be much more, I think, telecommuting than what we've experienced on campus in the past.
Thanks, Brian. Okay, next is a bit of information. My team addressed this for me, but there might be other information or other people out there with the same issue. I'm allergic to bleach, and we determined that facilities cleaning products are bleach-based. We requested that facilities not deep clean my office with those products, and I'll bring my own hydrogen peroxide-based cleaner in and clean my office at the end of each day. Sure, would you like to-
So Jenny was,
Yeah. Go ahead.
so is the question, can I do that as opposed to having facilities clean my office?
So I think they've said that they've worked it out with their supervisor already and with facilities already, but they're just sharing information. So if there's anything else that Cheryl would like to add about that, I think that would be great.
I think it's important to note that not all the products have bleach, but if you have special requirements where you have allergies, it is very important for us to know that, especially in offices. We don't have to go into offices and clean or disinfect, but we do need to know where we shouldn't be. Thank you.
Thanks, Cheryl. Okay, Glenn, back to the budget for a second. Glenn, you said about 100 positions were affected, 50 vacant and 50 cuts. How many of those were in the finance and business affairs area? And have all of those cuts been finalized, or are we still waiting for those to be announced?
And if Jen Steele's on here, if you could provide any additional information augmenting my answer. I believe we had about 30 positions from our division were in those numbers. Roughly more than half of those were vacant positions that we will not be filling. All of the non-classified adjustments have been made at this point in time. We're still waiting to finalize the classified positions. And so we would expect by the end of the month to have fully implemented any of the or all of those adjustments. But non-classified have been notified, and so it's only a few of the classified positions that are remaining.
And Glenn, I can confirm there are 26.
Okay, thank you. 26 total positions for our division.
Correct.
Okay, thanks Glenn and Jen. Next question, what can we expect for extracurricular aspects, sports, performing arts, clubs?
Jenny, could you repeat the question? I'm sorry.
You got it. So the question is about what we can expect given all of these guidelines for extracurricular activities. So things like sports, performing arts, how will that work in these new guidelines?
Well, I think one of the things we have to keep in mind is this is all new territory for us. And it was much easier, I think, to shut down than to turn the spigot back on. You know, we'll be continuing to follow CDC guidelines, the governor's guidelines, and it's hard to tell exactly what sports is going to look like this fall or in the future until we're past the pandemic. Katie, on your committee, has there been any discussion amongst your committee about the extracurricular activities and what they may look like?
Yeah, not necessarily within our committee, but I've heard a little bit of the discussion related to some of those items within the community committee, really. And I mean, you have the correct answer is we don't exactly know. So I know some of the plans that are in the works, they are planning for certain events that will maintain physical distancing, will encourage the use of face coverings, make perhaps disposable face coverings available for guests. But again, physical distance, face covering doesn't replace the need for physical distance. So I would imagine, at least speaking at this point and not knowing what's around the corner, that most events, if they happen, will utilize those types of things as well. So I know currently we do have a health exemption request form. So any events that are being planned, research activities that are resuming, and events that are being planned in the short term, event organizers are submitting their health exemption request form, and that is being reviewed by whatever committee basically is responsible for that area and our public health team. So through back and forth dialogue with each individual event planner, they're going through what are your guidelines for protection? What are your guidelines for physical distancing? How are you handling food? How are you handling, whatever the case may be? And they're working through those types of events one at a time. So on a case-by-case basis, definitely wanting to look for ways to still have events happen, but be able to happen still following the guidelines. So it's basically a case-by-case basis, but they're working through that between the public health team and any event organizers. So I anticipate, at least at this point, there is discussion of some of those types of things, sporting events, performances, things like that still occurring this fall. But again, we won't know until we get there. And I think you can expect, even if they do occur, that there will be additional guidelines in place.
Thank you, Katie.
Thanks, Katie. I'm going to get that form posted to everybody in just a second. Okay, I'm curious how the dorms will work. I have a niece that is planning on being in our dorms in the fall.
Student Affairs is currently working on a protocol with how to safely reopen the residence halls. As you know, we never did officially close the residence halls in the spring, but we moved students to one per room for those students who could not leave the residence halls. I believe it's still under formation as to what Student Affairs will actually do with the residence halls, but there will be a number of safeguards in place to maximize social distancing with that. Again, anybody who's been on the other committees, if they have more current information, they can share that as well.
Okay. Next question, can facilities discuss the measures being taken to sanitize campus restrooms? Also handling occupancy in restrooms and making sure that all restrooms are supplied toilet seat coverings as an example.
Cheryl, can you address that?
Sure. So the restrooms they're concentrating on the touch point when they clean all the restrooms in all common areas. And we're using an electrostatic fogger, which actually disperses particles of cleaning chemicals everywhere, and they go around corners and they adhere to the surfaces. We're investigating some chemicals right now that actually have the power to keep killing for 72 hours, which is good news, because that means, we can get the fogger into more areas. Also, the toilet seat coverings, we do have some of those in some of our facilities. We don't have them everywhere. So that's a good question. I don't know the percentage of places that do have those. Was there another part of the question, Ginny?
Excuse me, I believe that covered it, but while I have you, there are a couple of other facilities related questions. The first one is, will the buildings be put under a modified cleaning schedule? And if so, will this be made public? I'm thinking of those who might be considered coming in during an off time. They would need to know when not to come in case cleaning is underway.
Yes, those are good questions. So there's not a modified cleaning schedule. So the custodians would still come in essentially after hours. They do come in a little bit earlier on Fridays, as you know, and they're in different campuses have different hours. So those are in Pocatello. So they're not going to be using any of these chemicals where they need to suit up or have respirators when there's people present. And the chemicals don't travel a long distance, right? So if they were in a room or in an area and they saw somebody, they would just move out of the area. So I think that's that answers the question there, unless there's a follow-up to that.
No follow-up yet, just a different question for you, Cheryl. Some facilities workers are having problems working and breathing in the masks. What is the plan for those having problems?
So right now, the main thing is to talk with your supervisor about that. I know some people say that when they have to do heavy work, it's harder to breathe through the mask, so it makes it a little bit more difficult for them. And a lot of our workers are used to breathing through a mask that has a valve or a lighter weight mask like an N95 type mask, because that used to be the standard before it was considered PPE for healthcare. So I think you have to work individually, and there are going to be some people who can't wear masks for other reasons. And so there are alternative face covering types and things that we can investigate. I think it's just very important that we work those things out as soon as possible for people so they feel comfortable.
Okay, and Cheryl, two more for you. Follow up to the previous question. My concern would be how we handle those who might be allergic to those chemicals being sprayed in the restrooms. This concern would be real in all public occupied areas.
You mean you want to find out what were the chemicals that we're using, like the safety data sheets for the chemicals we're using? For example, when we outfitted the computer labs with the cleaning protocol and the chemicals there, we had a list of all of those chemicals, the killing times, etc. And so I think we can publish all of those and everyone can see them. Nancy, you can probably jump in here about those safety data sheets so that you know what it is.
The other thing might be from an HR perspective, Brian, I'm wondering if the question was more about I'm an employee who has an allergy to these cleaning agents or disinfecting agents. What can I do? Is there any type of accommodation?
That could definitely come into play. So I think as Cheryl mentioned, as they make any of that, those new chemicals be known, and or if there's any employees experiencing problems in their offices or in those restrooms as a result of those chemicals, then by all means we can work with HR, with disability services, and the management team to determine what is the right accommodation. Are there different chemicals that can be used, different timings in which the chemicals are used? We want to work through on a case-by-case basis to address the specific health needs of the employee and the cleaning needs of the building.
Also, a lot of these chemicals dissipate quickly and have low VOCs, in other words, volatile organic compounds that are released. And we're using them at night, and then they are dissipated by morning. But again, I mean, anybody that knows already that they have a special need or accommodation that needs to be met, I think they should contact us.
Thanks, Cheryl. And while I have you still, we have two more. Will buildings be completely shut down to have better or deeper cleaning times? Some buildings stay open longer than others, and some may be 24-hour buildings.
We have shut down buildings in certain areas at certain times. Of course, during this time, we've taken advantage of the less amount of people on campus. But we have discussed in some of our roaring back committees, what would we do if we found that someone on campus had COVID, and then we would go through tracing where their steps were and perhaps shut down certain areas for cleaning. Like I say, most of these things can be done fairly quickly, but we may have to. We haven't had to shut down areas of Pocatello. We did shut down areas of Meridian and cleaned there when the first case touched there in Idaho.
Thanks, Cheryl. And last one for you for a second, I think. If we work in an area that the bathroom doesn't have hot water, are they going to install one so that we can wash with hot water?
That's a good question. I guess we need to know where that is and address it. Why don't you send me a note about that in the private chat? Thank you.
Next question.
Maybe,
go ahead, Cheryl.
I was going to say, maybe it just needs to be fixed, but I don't know.
Okay, great. Next question. What actions will be taken to prevent academic dishonesty among students if students are at testing at home or testing at home or on campus?
We've actually, in the spring, as we moved to courses to online, we've expanded our use of online proctoring services. And that's certainly one of those expenditures that we're looking to the CARES Act to help reimburse us. But the academic affairs team and ETS is clearly on top of that. Also, faculty members are adjusting their evaluation exercises to look for that as well. This is not something that's new to us, as the provost has said in her town halls. We've been dealing with academic dishonesty in the online market since online became a modality of course delivery. And this just means we need to spend a little more time, effort, and money in making sure that these situations don't occur, or that we limit them to the greatest extent possible.
Next question. Has the campus considered offering face coverings to students free of charge?
Yeah, I can talk about that just really quickly. The student committee is working on that, and they're working on the decision points for that. They're having that discussion right now. I don't know if there's been a final decision on that yet, but they are working in that direction.
Thanks, Katie. Back to the budget. Thanks, Katie. 2 further questions. Number 1, with the 26 positions cut from finance and business affairs, has that caused restructuring of the division so that work can still be done? And number 2, the vacant CIO position is the vacant CIO position still going to be filled? And can anything be said about the status of that?
Yes, we can answer both of those questions. The first question, yes, it did cause some restructure within the division. We've eliminated several director level positions, an AVP position as well. I challenged our leadership team of the division to look at, could we do work differently and still maintain the service levels to students, faculty, and staff through these reductions. And that would, of course, require us doing our jobs differently. So we are in the process of restructuring through these eliminations. We will be having an announcement at the end of June as to what our new organization is looking like, who moved where, and what positions have been moved or changed or altered. The second question, specifically around the CIO search, the search committee has been continuing to work through this process. they hosted a series of first round interviews via Zoom, and they have now narrowed the list to a number of candidates who will then take part in another series of Zoom interviews, perhaps a half a day or day long, with a number of constituencies. And then we hope that from that group that we get down to a couple of candidates that we would be able to invite to campus. Our target all along had been to have a CIO announcement sometime in the month of June, with that person being on campus in the position sometime during the summer. We may be a couple of weeks behind that, but not much more than that.
Thanks, Glenn. Next question. So there are several classified positions that could still be cut over the next few weeks. That's a question.
Yes, yes, there are. We've identified the areas, and we're working through the notification process.
Okay, back to facilities for a second. Is facilities considering using the spray method of sanitizing in classrooms? Example is using the sanitizing agents on chairs, desks, tables, etc.
Yes, we can do that. We just have to be careful with equipment, any type of electronics. We can't use the chemicals that have the brew tabs or the bleach. It's a very weak solution of bleach, but we still have to be careful with that. In between classes, I know a lot of people have asked about that. Like, what do we do when we have the class and the next hour we have a whole another group of people in there? We can have the cleaning supplies in there so that people can wipe down the surfaces between each, just like we did with the computer labs that were open during this time. And of course, there would be a social distancing component to those classrooms already, but so that you would know which areas you can wipe down and which no one will be sitting in.
Thanks, Cheryl. One more for you. Is there a plan to turn off drinking fountains and leave bottle filling stations available?
No, there isn't a plan to turn them off. There's just the guidance from the CDC about not putting your mouth on a drinking fountain, and the bottle filling stations will also remain on. The stream of water, you can get into the bottle without touching the station itself.
Glenn, I think that
we've also identified some additional bottle filling stations, several that will be installed, I believe, over the summer. Is that correct, Cheryl?
Yes, we're looking at those areas, especially that we talked about in common areas where there's been a drinking fountain removed that's old. We'd love to get some of those in there, so we're working on it.
Thanks, Cheryl. And Glenn, I think that wraps up our questions for today. I'll turn it back over to you.
Well, thank you, everyone. I hope this was a helpful update. Again, I appreciate everything you're doing and working through this new and uncharted environment. I guess it's not so new now that it's been several months, but yet every day I continue to learn something different and see a different challenge. So I appreciate all of your help, all of your dedication to the institution, to our students and our faculty. If there are questions that you didn't get a chance to ask today, please send them to finance@isu.edu. We will check that website and we'll address those for you. I, again, appreciate your time. You're welcome to come again tonight at the 8 o'clock. I know last time we had several individuals at both of our sessions. We've done the evening session to make it accessible for those workers who aren't here or engaged in that 7 to 4, 8 to 5 timeframe. So again, thank you for your participation. Thank you for your questions. Thank you for your hard work. and look forward to connecting with you in the coming weeks.